Welcome to Read Poems Every Day. I thought we might continue some notes on T.S. Eliot's Rhapsody on a windy night. We've already counted some beans. We listened for sound and sense, most recently developing an account of the prose sense of the poem. And now it falls to us to think about the poem's form. Now, there's a way in which, well, like one thing I sometimes do when reading poems is I try to look for um, genres that are referenced in the poem's title or somewhere in the poem. And while we might not think of Rhapsody as a specific kind of genre, it has, as the OED tells us, if I just look up Rhapsody, um, it has its root in a sense of genre, in at least a sort of mode of poetic narration or recitation. And so it seems important that Eliot's eliciting that as the mode of the poem, which is also a way of thinking about its form, also a way of thinking about its genre. All these words for me sometimes slip and slide in and out of each other: mode, genre, form. But of course, they don't all mean the same thing per se. But I guess taking a step back even further, they help us think about the arrangement of something or how the thing has been put together. So Rhapsody, uh, given that relation to the epic, right, a sense of journey, a sense of journey, especially with respect to Homer, sort of scaled up account of events, of events, some sense of narrative, though not hmm, necessarily grounded in realism. Hence the, sort of more modern association of the word with emotion or even exaggerated emotion, right? We might think of that the form of the poem, form of the poem, the mode of the poem. It sort of is consciously bringing those aspects of this word, thought as genre, together. Um, there is also a marked temporal progression throughout the poem, right? And it's quite clearly announced at the beginning of several stanzas. Not every stanza, stanza one, stanza two, stanza four, stanza five, and stanza six. So almost all of the stanzas, the time is announced, um, factors into stanza organization as well. There's also a kind of dialogue here between the speaker's experience. That experience is hazy, very few instances of I throughout the poem. I mean, we have one in line 8 here, but if we scroll back up to my account of pronouns, which is somewhere, there's only sort of 4 instances of a first person singular pronoun in the poem, although every reference to your is also a reference to the speaker. But anyway, that brings me back to the dialogue. Also, a kind of dialogue sort of organizing and operating in the poem between the speaker giving an account of his experience of sort of post midnight wandering, um, and the um, animated street lamps. So the street lamps are not addressed, they are the ones doing the addressing, but the poem, not through apostrophe, but just through good old, personification, animates them into a dialogue partner. But of course, it's not just one street lamp, it's every street lamp, right? So the street lamp, the set of street lamps announced in stanza one, it is a kind of crowd, and one of them speaks at 1:30, another one speaks at, I mean, it's not explicit that another one is speaking, but the first stanza kind of sets up that expectation that we're kind of moving, right, from stanza to stanza. We're moving in space as we move from stanza to stanza, so that each street lamp that one is walking under is, announcing these incantations, these lunar incantations, and those lunar incantations that the poem articulates into its lines and images unlock sort of random memories, or associated memories, let's say free associated memories. Street lamp whispers, "Hi, honey." We call these incantations. My cat Lila is up on the desk now. "Hi, honey. Hi, baby. It's a little early to be asking for dinner. Hi. Hello. Hello, honey. Hi. Hello." If you can see her in the bottom corner here. "Hello. Hi, honey." Okay. Um. Hello. Animated street lamp sort of whispers. We have that notion of incantation, which is not unrelated, of course, to enchantment, which is not unrelated to the word song, which is not unrelated to the word poetry. So we're also then back at Rhapsody, a kind of like um, um, elaborate kind of epic level speech act. Although I guess epic, an incantation, a spell is very different than an epic. So we actually have a kind of maybe mixing of forms in the poem. "Hello, yes, you're helping me. You're helping very, very much. Very, very much." Street lamp whispers or beats a drum. This is what we get, the fatalistic drum here. So we have different um, figures being introduced to try to capture the experience of walking under these lamps at midnight, and then at 1:30, 2:30, 3:30, 4 a.m. It's a drum. These are the lines within quotation marks. Other lines respond with freely associated memories, usually of objects, right? Usually of objects. And so the poem is then a kind of inventory of what these midnight experiences kick up for the speaker. And we're kind of left wondering what we're to make of that as the poem progresses. And it's really just in the final line that what the street lamp says doesn't seem to kick up a memory, but sort of snaps the speaker back maybe to the present, which is experienced as, again, that twist of a knife. Twist of a knife. Phrases and words repeat throughout the poem, creating, through lines, connective tissue, similar images that change as they are sort of recontextualized in a later stanza, calling back to an earlier one. Okay. I mean, we could, for instance, just think about how the poem, how the voice of that initial street lamp encouraging the speaker to regard, to look at a woman who hesitates near the light of a door, whether or not there's actually a woman there. It's unclear. The word twist that's attributed to the street lamp then becomes part of this activity of memory, that the things in memory are experienced as twisted, twisted, twisted up, a twisted branch, a broken spring. But a lot of these objects are um, hmm, tainted in some way, imperfect in some way, twisted, broken. Um, the experience of a stolen toy, perhaps. Experience of people peeping through windows. These weird lines about a crab, like what on, again, one would have to kind of track and follow maybe that those threads of association, but the repetition of the poem, which we've already talked about, part of the sound system of the poem, is also part of the form by which words, images repeat and change along the way, and also start to assemble into some account of, I don't know, a psyche, um, a state of affairs, sort of existential comment. It's a little unclear at the moment exactly what might be going on. But it is, again, sort of giving proof rock. It is a very different poem, but there are certain things in it that remind me quite a lot of the poem Proof Rock, of the love song of Geoffrey Proof Rock. Okay, so that's some comments about form. And again, remember with form, I'm just kind of thinking about the arrangement of the poem, the relationship of its different parts, the kind of different layers of it, the relationship of the title to the poem, the relationship of the stanzas to each other, what kind of shape they make, how they pressure each other's meaning. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to mark out here, even if it's through repeating things I may have already said about the poem. Okay, so what about uh, figures or figuration here? You might just call out a few things, just glance through the poem and then sort of note a few things. Um, Note a few things that we see, again, the kind of animation of street lamps as beating, as whispering, um, and midnight sort of shaking, right? We have a simile. We'll just say in stanza one, we have that animation of the street lamps and of midnight. We also have the simile, right? Midnight shakes the memory. It's so weird that it's the memory here, not just my memory. The poet has already used the word I, but doesn't use a personal pronoun here. It's just like midnight shakes the memory. That's so strange. Wonder why Eliot didn't say my memory. I don't know. Something to think about, maybe. Maybe I'll add that here. Have to come back to it in a future video, maybe. Why not? My memory. And so that's line 11. Okay. Okay, midnight shakes the memory, coming back here to the simile, as a madman shakes a dead geranium. I mean, it's a very modernist sort of simile in the sense that it seems almost absurd, right? It doesn't have the what we might think of as sort of conventional poetic allure of a beautiful simile that really expresses something profound, often by way of, sort of elegant amplification or sort of stunning insight. But instead, there's a weird sort of both concrete. There's a weird concreteness to the image that's also confusing. What does it mean? And then you have the alliteration tying all of it together: midnight memory, madman, four M's kind of holding the integrity of the simile together. but why is midnight shaking memory, right? Which is another way the poet is articulating what the experience of walking under these street lamps is doing, right? Is shaking. Maybe I haven't spent much time, and maybe we won't go through and inventory all of the figures. We might just pause over this one and think about what to do with it. What do you do with a simile as you're thinking through it? Well, one thing I sometimes do, especially when I come across one is um, befuddling as this one, is I just try to kind of work out its logic, right? Um, so you have midnight being compared to a madman, the activity of midnight as shaking the memory, doing something to our memories, um, being compared to a madman shaking a dead flower, right? Shaking a dead flower. Um, I mean, the notion. I mean, it's a complex simile in the sense that it's not just shaking a geranium or a plucked geranium; it's a dead one, and that's important to the comparison because memories. That there's also then a comparison being made between the past, right? Memories as kind of imperfect records or fingerprints of trace evidence of something that has happened before, and a dead flower, right? A plucked flower, and in a sense, as soon as you've plucked a flower, it starts, right? It starts the process of dying, which you can prolong by putting it in water, but it can't root again, right? So it's in a sense already dead. Um, and so a flower you pluck is already a kind of trace of what it once was, uh, what if it had been planted. There's also maybe the extra question of geraniums themselves. I don't know if the OED will be at all helpful here, since it's probably just going to tell me it's a flower, right? Yeah, probably often associated with a kind of color here. Okay, well, I might have to look that up another time. The kind of um, associations one might tend to have with geraniums. If I had my giant, I mean, I have my big fat giant T.S. Eliot book over here. I could maybe look it up there just to see what's going on, and maybe I will before we come back to it. Anyway, but as my rambling is trying to sort of show you like when you identify a figure of speech, if you really want to think about it, it's not just enough to say, hey, that's a simile, but to really start to get to know the poem, you also have to think about how those, especially if it's a comparative figure of speech like simile, how it's working, and especially if there's lots of parts to it, not just my love is like a rose, but midnight shakes the memory, which is itself it contains figurative language. Midnight is being sort of animated into a kind of agent, that's then sort of folded, complicated, by a simile being attached to that animation. And there's sort of three parts to each end of the comparison: the agent, midnight, madman, the activity, shaking, sort of a violent activity, um, and then memory, right, being compared to this geranium. And one wonders why someone would be mad to shake a dead geranium. Is it because you have to be a little insane to think if you shake a dead flower, it'll come back to life? And is that what Midnight's doing? Right? Shaking memory. I mean, what else is happening here if not certain objects, probably that the speaker has not thought about for a long time, come back to the surface, right? As if they could come back at all, but they can't. They're dead, right? In a sense. And once we sit with that simile long enough, we might then start to get a sense of how it's setting the scene for the whole poem and establishing the poem's vibe. Okay. Well, maybe we'll leave that there then, right? I spent a long time on that simile, um, a long time just on that one simile, and there are, of course, lots and lots of other ones throughout the poem. But I think the primary one being the animation of the street lamps as a speaking entity, sputtering, muttering, humming, and then the poem putting those hums and sputters and mutters into speech, right? Something that whispers that the speaker's picking up. All right, that's enough. That's enough for today, I think. I'll think a bit more. Maybe we'll come back and flesh out figures in the next video before moving into ideas and questions, and then some contexts. And maybe I'll look up. There's geraniums again. See what I mean? Images repeating each other. All right. Well, thanks for spending more time with me and T.S. Eliot. And hey, let's read more poems tomorrow.